Right, folks, we haven't got time to hear all the stories, but let's get a couple, shall we? Let's have a couple of the stories of joy overtaking me. But you've got to tell somebody else's story, right? So who would like to go? Who would like to have a go? Who got captured by a story? Go ahead, Dave.
A wonderful story of the birth of, the memory of the birth of each of 3 children. That's what sticks out for Pastor Patrick.
As joy.
Yep.
Yeah. So what did you, when you were hearing that story, did you get engaged in that story? Did you identify with it?
Well, I did initially, but it didn't stick as much as his other story.
Okay.
but it did. I'm like, yes, those are cool. I had 3 kids.
I can see that.
We had a funny conversation about it, which may not be where you're going. So,
Catherine, you.
This is going to be a joint story. This is a Mary and Peter story.
Yep, we're doing joy, yep.
Okay. First of all, it's the pain story of when they first met. And there was an age difference between them, and Mary's parents didn't approve of Peter. They still kept going out, but then Mary went, no, sorry, can't do this, whatever. And I'm just making this brief, but that's basically what it was, and it was painful for them.
Yep.
It was painful for them. And then a few years later, they re-met, and they both become Christians, and so that connection was very different again.
Yep.
And Peter's parents loved Mary. It was a little bit more difficult for Mary's parents. But they got married, and it was a little bit hard at the wedding, but when Mary's mother was sick and she was actually dying, they were able to share the gospel really strongly with her, and then she loved Peter and things like that. So that's a pleasure and pain story.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really terrific. Well, let's have one more pain story. Had someone got a story of pain that they could share for somebody else? Somebody else's pain. Go ahead.
This is what Peter, one of the painful things he had to do was to work for free for 2 weeks for a boss that didn't want to pay it, and then having to walk away from it. So
Right. So work for 3 weeks, not get paid, and then have to walk away from it.
2 weeks pay.
Right, 2 weeks. Right. Yeah. That would be painful. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else got any stories they feel like I just have to tell this story? Yes.
Okay, so Casey, the one sitting there, looking pretty similar to me because of the shirt. she and her husband is on working holiday here, and so her pain came from the banana hand, which is that she was working in this banana farm, and then she has to pack the bananas like into the box very efficiently, very quick, because as the boss was saying to her that if you don't pack it fast, you're gonna lose your job.
Right.
And they were trying to get the 2nd year working holiday visa by working in the farm at more than 3 months. So they are quite in a stressful and pressure time. Yeah. So she says that every morning she woke up with the banana. Very painful, but they made it. They are on a 2nd year visa.
Well, that's great. So there's joy, right? Yeah, that's great. Did you see how often, and Catherine, the story you share of Mary and Peter is how often it's the contrast between joy and pain that highlights the other, right? So very often it's when we're feeling great pain, it's because it's highlighted against joy, and vice versa. They mean the most when they're in contrast to each other. But did anyone notice there's a commonality in the stories of joy, and there's an equal commonality in the stories of pain, which you may not necessarily see on the surface, but let's see if we can dig a little bit and find those out. What do you tend to notice when you're talking about stories of joy?
Smiles.
We do smile, exactly, that's right, exactly. Which actually is right on point to what I'm trying to get at. We smile because why?
Because
We're happy?
yes.
But smiling is, we communicate, right?
Yeah.
It's a communication. Well, we communicate because other people are involved, right? So even when we smile when we're on our own, it's usually because we're remembering something that involves somebody else, right? So the stories of joy always seem to involve those connections with other people. We very rarely have joyous stories that are on our own, except if that story enables us to tell somebody else our story and become closer to them because of it, right? It's the fact that we can tell a story, even when it's a story about what we've done on our own, that gives us the real joy. Joy is an emotion that we share with each other typically. Not 100% universally, but typically it's true. So with that in mind, think about the stories of embarrassment or pain. Can you notice something about that that might go into that same area? It'll be true for almost every story. Not everyone, but almost everyone. It'll involve this element.
Tears.
Tears, yeah. Tears are a communication device. It's a reflection of what's going on inside of ourselves. But think of that idea of being involving people.
Something where it's disconnected.
Disconnection.
Yes.
Almost always.
Death or...
Absolutely. Absolutely. If we were able to tell everybody's stories here, they would almost always, the pain stories would almost always involve disconnection, separation.
Yes.
Even the banana story. It's a physical pain, right? But it was about trying to stay here, because that's about the future, it's about family, it's about hope, and it's about all those things. So you see that link? Now, Patrick came up, and I think this might be what you're going to say too, David, but he came up with an observation, came and told me an observation. Patrick, why don't you tell me about
Yeah,
that?
it was interesting when David and I were sharing some stories, both the joy stories and the sad stories in some ways. Afterwards, we were rehearsing, so like, okay, so you're going to tell my story, you're going to tell, and vice versa. And the sad story we could just, remember very easily. It's like, oh yeah, it was about that. And then he looked at it like, okay, so what was the good story? And we were both looking at each other, and it's like, and in the end, somewhere it was registered, but it was much more difficult to remember. It's like, because somehow we relate to each other's painful stories much easier.
Right.
True.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Did anyone else notice that? That stories of pain, embarrassment, disconnection, we have a tendency to gravitate towards the emotion a whole lot quicker.
Yeah.
When I was telling my story there, you felt my pain very quickly, right? And in fact, I see a few people tearing up when I was telling that story, because you immediately engage in that story. We gravitate towards understanding loss and brokenness. When we tell a happy story, oh, that's nice. It takes a really good story to get us to that same place of emotional connection. That's interesting, isn't it? This awareness of brokenness, this awareness of separation is very, very, very deep within our being. That's an important thing to notice. All right? Now, here's some statements that I think you'll all agree with. We all love to love, right?
Yeah.
In fact, you've probably heard me say that before. We love to love. We love it. We love loving people. We live to love. Our best stories are about things that involve love. We think about the next chance we get to love somebody. We all want to be loved. We all really desire to be loved.
Amen.
We experience love when we experience worth. All right. I said that last night, but I need to keep saying it. If we miss that connection, we miss everything. There's nothing more important in understanding love than understanding that it's always connected to worth. And so people will say, "But I love them. I love them," and they just walked away, or they got upset, or whatever. But I was just loving them. the question in that thing, and it's not always the fault of the person that's trying to do the loving. Sometimes it is the reality of the person that's on the receiving end. But what's happening is that person that didn't respond effectively isn't experiencing worth. They aren't experiencing value. And so, whenever we see a person around, but I loved them. I did it. All I wanted to do was love them. And they got upset with me because they're not experiencing worth. Now that may not be your fault, but it's a good place to start. Well, if they're upset with me, and I'm trying to love them, then maybe I need to think about this in a different way. Try and think about how they'll feel valuable. That's not an exercise that you can do perfectly all the time, because there's some people that have such thick walls up, you can't make them feel valuable. You cannot do anything to restore worth into their life. And so it takes when I say you can't do anything, you can, but it takes a long, long, long time. But if we're going to just bring it back to the very, very simple, if we want to love somebody, we find a way to communicate worth to them. All right? All right. So, love is ultimately a relational term. When I experience worth, I experience love. When I feel worth less, I experience love less. That's shame. We're going to talk about shame this morning. But when I experience love less, what I'm experiencing is shame. So if ever I put somebody into a place where they're feeling unloved, they're feeling shame. I'm going to unpack that today for us, because I think it's the most misunderstood concept. When I started realizing these things, it switched a light on my life, so much so that I've dedicated 20 years to trying to understand these things. By the way, the folks amongst us that come from shame honor cultures, you will understand this a lot better than those of us that come from Western cultures, European cultures. We have to work a little. It's still very much there. We just have to work a little bit harder to get it to the surface. You guys that come from shame honor cultures, you understand the community engagement, the connection, that my worth is very much related to my family, my community. And so shame is to feel worth less because you put outside the family or the community. But in a Western culture, European culture, we're very individual. And so what we want to do is we want to deal with failure or sin as something we can punish. And then because then I can deal with the individual. Now the individual will feel shame in that, but we want to exclude shame and we want to deal with guilt. I'm going to expand that a whole lot more, but I want to just start that off here. I recognize that as we're talking about this stuff, some of you have heard some of this stuff before. Won't hurt you to hear it again at all. Some of you, this will be new stuff. Then you go, oh man, I've never thought about that before. If you come from a shame honor culture, it'll twig probably a lot quicker. But if you're a European Western culture, you have to think about it a little bit more. But you'll still say, oh yeah, I see that. So that's where I want you guys to give feedback as we're going along. If you see anything in this that impacts you. So I want to talk about the power of shame throughout this morning. It is the great lie. Shame lives to lie. Shame lies to us constantly. Our thoughts that bring shame into our lives are lies. I want to demonstrate to you, you will get this as soon as I do this little exercise. Now, I want you to know I'm a trained professional. Don't want you to do this at home. Don't do this at home, all right? A little bit of a borrowing of a line there, but I'm actually serious about that. I'm going to do something this morning. I'm about to start lying. You're going to hear me lie. Say one lie after another. They're all lies. Patrick, I talked with you last night, and I set him up for this. I told Patrick I'm going to lie to him. So Patrick, I want you to come and stand over here. Just stand there. Thanks, Patrick. Now, we've set you up for this. You know I'm about to lie to you, don't you? I hope so. So this all lies, okay? So Patrick, I've known you about a year. That's not a lie, actually. I have known you a little bit. Well, actually, we first met about 3 or 4 years ago, but I've really known you just a little over a year.
Yes.
I got to tell you, Patrick, I'm really disappointed. I expect a lot more of you. I thought you'd be better than what you are. In fact, I've come to the place where I really don't like to be around you because you just frustrate me. And you know, I'm sure you're probably amongst the worst pastors that I've ever seen because you just can't do the job the way I think you do. I hear so many bad things about you all the time that I don't know what to do with it. I'm not sure why you're even here. You don't belong here at all. I'm going to stop right there. Everything I said was a lie, right? How did you feel, Patrick?
I started wondering a little bit about that. I'm like, okay. Why?
Yeah.
I don't know, it came in very strongly, yes.
I told you last time I was going to lie to you. In fact, we joked about it. In fact, you had a look, and I said, what I want you to do is pay attention to the processing. That's exactly, you had to start, as we got further and further in, you had to start processing harder and harder and harder, right? You had to, well, it is a lie. All of that was a lie. Patrick, I want to do some remedial action here. I love you, brother. That you're amazing, and you do an incredible job, and I know that everybody loves you, and I love you, and I'm so glad you're in my life. Really, really. Let me give you a Now, let me ask you guys, how did you feel when I was doing that? The first one. When I was saying those things, how did you feel?
I wanted to protest.
You say it's not true, right? What do other people feel?
Uncomfortable.
Really uncomfortable, right? Where did that come from? It actually did feel uncomfortable. I could feel you guys.
Yeah.
I could feel you guys saying, "Will you just stop?"
Oh yeah.
Right? That's what you're thinking.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, time out.
We got the point. Right?
Amen. No.
That's right. What are you doing?
You know what I was wondering? Like, are there people here actually saying like,
That's a great
you
observation.
immediately refer to others.
Yeah, that's
how I
right.
perceive
We
it.
could see.
What if there are some people here that actually think that, and I'm saying what they think?
You're verbalizing it.
Yeah, exactly. So
So
before we go any further, everyone who feels like those were all a lie, just raise your hand. Everyone thinks I'm speaking truth. You can keep your hand up. All right. Easy. But do you see how? Thanks, Patrick. Do you see how? I love you, mate. I really, really love you.
Take one for the team.
But you see, you have to keep reaffirming, right? Because we don't easily. I have to do a lot of fixing. In fact, you guys know Richard Giskin?
Yes.
Yeah. I did that with Richard 10 years ago. About 3 months ago, he said, I still struggle when I think about that. I still struggle with that. And so that's the power of the lie. Shame is very, very real. Did you see how the things that I was saying was putting Patrick outside of the community? It was telling you don't belong, you have no value. Did you hear how that was pushing him outside? And in himself was saying, no, I do belong. And in fact, if I'm going to process this, I have to keep saying, no, this is not true. I know I belong. But what if there's some people that actually don't think I do belong? And that's why I say don't do. If you try doing that at home, you'll break relationships. And in fact, that's how we do it. If we're really upset with somebody, and we want them to know we're upset with them, those are the kind of things we say, right? I don't want anyone to put your hand up, but I know there were some people here, when you were a child, your mum or dad said to you, you're worthless. Do you remember that? Some way they said to you, and that still lives with you. And you're spending your life trying to prove them that they were wrong. I know that that's reality. Any room I speak in, there are people that have had that experience. Those are lies. But they are incredible. But why? Why is it so powerful when we love to love, we live to love, we want to be loved? Why is that deep, 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 deep within our being response. It's not superficial. We can laugh superficially. We never feel shame, that kind of shame, at that level. It's always deep within our being. It's an identity thing. So when I speak to Patrick that way, the reason it takes so much processing is because deep within Patrick, there's an identity that says, I think that's true. And we all deal with that. That's why that is so powerful, but that's a lie. And that's why we're going to try and unpack this stuff. And that's why we started with what's love got to do with it last night. Because unless we can identify this stuff and recognize how love can respond to that, we can never effectively live the life of faith. Nor can we ever effectively be the church that God calls us to be. And the vast majority of churches live in that place where they have never seen that connection. And so we go through the motions and we live our duty and we do what we're supposed to do and never get to seeing the transformation of our lives that is supposed to come when love goes to that place in our life, because we've got such great defense mechanisms that we've designed to bury that part of our life that we don't take love to that place. Because sometimes we don't even want to look at ourselves. We keep it locked up. We keep it hidden away. All right. So I've got a passage of scripture here. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. Then his son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Bring the fat, I must have missed it, skipped a verse there. Bring the fat, this is the dad talking, bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. What story is that? Prodigal son. I want us to unpack the prodigal son a little bit here this morning. And see it in terms of shame, not just the guilt that a Westerner might see it. So a Westerner reads that story and sees the guilt of doing the wrong thing and the forgiveness of the father, which is great, and it's true, but it's only a very, very small part of the story. So I only got the end of it there. So let's unpack the prodigal son story. What happened with the prodigal son? Where does it begin? By the way, before we start, why do you think Jesus tells so many stories?
They stick.
We relate to them because we live stories, right? What I said, our life is a story. Jesus tells stories because when you're telling stories, we can relate to them. They become true. That's exactly right. So, beginning point. I saw a hand over here. What's the beginning point of the story?
So the son doesn't want to wait until his dad dies.
Right.
He's impatient.
He
wants to get his inheritance now.
Wants to get his inheritance now. Right. Okay. That's very, very important. That's the starting point. He's impatient. He doesn't want to wait to get his inheritance. He wants it now. Do you know why? Well, this is a shame on a culture. In the shame on a culture, everybody gets inheritance, but the oldest son gets the biggest share and they get the name. They get the honor. So there's a certain amount of honor to all the children of a wealthy family, but the one who gets the real honor, the one who is the most honored, is the oldest son. So if a younger son is going to get honor, they will need to create their own family, their own context, their own group, and be the one who imparts the honor, and then they will become the patriarch of the new family, and they will have the honor of being the person in that first place. So this isn't just him, I really want to get my money. This is him not feeling good enough and wanting to feel valuable. That's the context of the story. So when Jesus tells that story, everyone knows, I know what that feels like. In a shame on a story, in a shame on a culture, most people choose to honor that process and know that in time, because of the way the culture works, I will get to the place where I will receive honor. If I work hard and do the right things, I will get to there. So when Jesus starts telling this story, people go, well, that's not right. That's not how it works. If you want to feel honor, you stay within the family. You don't go outside of the family. So everyone knows this guy's doing the wrong thing, right? So when we hear it from European ears, we think, well, he's very selfish. But when you hear it from a shame honor perspective, what you hear is, yes, he's being selfish, but he's also being shameful. He's acting in a way that brings shame on his family. And you can't do anything worse than bringing shame on your family. So that's where it starts. So what happens next? What happens next in that story? So he goes to his dad and he says, I want my money. What does the dad do? The dad gives him the money. Okay, so in a Western culture, now, okay, we can get that. He says, okay, you want your money? I'm going to give you your money. But in a shame culture, what would be the response? You guys that come from a shame honor culture, what would be the response typically? Why would you do that to me? Why would you treat me that way? Don't you realize that brings shame on your family? Is that right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But what does the father do? But what does he actually do? Loves him?
Yes.
Gives him the money. This is incredibly important. Incredibly important. And it's going to deal with the truth I'm going to unpack a little bit further later on. Love doesn't control.
Yeah.
So this father, who is representative of the Heavenly Father, doesn't control. He doesn't use shame to say, no, you stay within the context. He says, if you can't live right out of love, I will set you free. So he gives him the money. Then what does the son do? He wastes it, but where does he waste it? In a far country. Okay, so it's a very, very clear illusion there, right? He's gone to a far country. He's gone outside of the family. He's in the place of shame. He's no longer connected to the place of honor. He's in a far country like Australia. So he's outside of where the honor. That's right. That's some shame there. Us folks that have been here for a few hundred years, 150 years or whatever, we're getting over it. But so this is Australia. It's the faraway country.
Yeah.
So he goes outside of the community. He's in the faraway place, but he's in the faraway place. Why? To get honor. I can get my own honor here. I can be the life of the party. I can be the person that helps everybody else to get what they want. When I do that, they will honor me. I will get honor. I've taken my control of my life, and I'm going to get honor. Right? So now what happens? What's that?
Uses it for the wrong thing.
He does use it for the wrong thing, but all of those wrong things are about him getting honor. But using it's important. What happens in the using of it? He runs out. He uses it all up. He cannot do enough to get enough honor, right? He can't do enough. He's trying to do it shortcut. He's trying to get there quickly. Can't do enough, and he runs out of money. What happens next? He has to work, but where does he have to work? Feed the pigs.
Yeah.
Now even us with Western ears get that picture, because we understand that pigs in that culture are shame-filled. We know feeding pigs is about shame. That Jesus not playing around with this story. He knows that everybody that hears him knows immediately this guy is in the place of utter shame. He is absolutely worthless. Jesus puts him feeding pigs. Everybody knows this guy has no hope of coming back. He is in the place of total worthlessness. No coming back from here. Can't come back. So what does he do? What does he do?
So he is coming back to Father.
Right, but what's the story in here? What's the story that he starts telling himself when he starts thinking about going back to his father? Story. What's the story he tells himself?
What was I thinking?
Father wouldn't accept him. Yep, that's right. Not as a
Maybe
son, he
only
wouldn't
the
accept him.
servants.
But he might accept him as a servant.
That's right.
How much honour is there being? It's not servant actually; it's a slave. How much honour is there in
Slave.
being a slave?
Not
None. But why does he think that might be okay? Because at least he gets fed, right?
Yeah.
Even the slaves in my Father's place are eating something.